Welcome to the Solid Verbal.
The Solid Verbal.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
I've heard so many players say, well, I want to be happy. You want to be happy for a day? Eat a steak.
It's that woo woo!
And now, Dan and Ty.
Hey everybody, it's yet another show. This one is called Only Homers Allowed. It's a reference to this from The Simpsons. You're probably old enough to remember.
But you let in Homer Glumplet.
It says no homers. We're allowed to have one.
Oh, I felt so left out.
And so because we're doing deep dives on random teams that we either love or we're just interested in, this week we're starting with Oregon. They just beat Washington. I threw out the idea of doing a mid-season check-in with how I'm feeling about Oregon, with how our guest Geoff Schwartz is feeling about Oregon, former Oregon offensive lineman, longtime NFL offensive lineman. He now does work on the radio, does work for the Action Network. So decided that we are just going to box Ty out because he is normally too professional to let me talk about Oregon for too long. So with that, I am going to bring on Geoff. Geoff, how's life in Charlotte?
Life is good. Life is better when Oregon football wins some games. So it's fantastic.
All right. So let's this is what we're focusing on. So I guess let's start here and rewind a little bit. How has Oregon looked in comparison to your expectations going into the season? How have they looked and how have they performed as it relates to what you were expecting?
Oh, they performed much better. I mean, I think we all assumed that Herbert was going to be good. Just to what extent was he going to be good? But the physicality, in my opinion, is something that no one expected out of this Oregon team. I think we thought eventually Mario Cristobal would bring that toughness to our team, but not as quickly as it happened, and then not as kind of as much of a bully as I think people have seen us play so far.
And this is probably the most, physical is kind of a weird term because all offensive line, all trench play is inherently physical, but the degree to which Oregon is relying on plays between the tackles, I would say, is surprising. That when something even moderately works, they just repeat it. They're depending on an offensive line that really, coming into the season, was thought of as a strength, but the depth and degree to which they're relying on this it's such a surprise. Well,
I agree. I mean, they are definitely relying on it a lot. I mean, they ran the ball 46 times, I think, against Washington. Mm-hmm. They only went through 30. We saw against Stanford really a big, heavy reliance on the run game. And they're very simple, man. They'll just bludgeon you to death. They don't care. 4-yard carries, 3-yard carries, 7-yard carries, 8-yard carries. They're going to hit you over and over and over again. Eventually, they'll break out that long run. It keeps the defense off the field. But what's funny is that I think it's actually hindered Justin Herbert because when we watch him play, if he throws the ball 2 times in a row, it doesn't happen very often. That second throw often is like a bullet. Like it's a very good throw. Mm-hmm. And it feels like they need to let him throw more, but you can't really, how do you tell Mario Cristobal to do anything different because it's working right now?
Yeah, it seems like it's in a good place. And the perception is probably a little bit inflated because they win that Washington game. Part of it is luck and part of it is taking advantage of situations. And that's, all football is taking advantage of situations and capitalizing on stuff. Your point, I think, is well received on Justin Herbert. I don't think he has the receivers nearly on the level that the offensive line is performing, and I don't think he has the skill talent in general. I think the running backs are fine, but I don't think in terms of looking back to, Jonathan Stewart, LeGarrette Blount, LaMichael James, Kenyon Barner, Royce Freeman, there isn't that guy in the backfield. And to me, it's almost like Mario Cristobal. I know you're a healthy eater, and I've made this comparison before. There's something about a chopped coach versus a top chef coach, and Mario Cristobal with limited talent right now at places, I think is getting the most out of his ingredients.
Oh, I 100% agree with you here, which I think is why it's very impressive what he's doing. And, they have supposedly a top 5 class right now, which Oregon has never had. And who knows if they end up there, but just having the number 1 recruit in town against the Washington Huskies, and he comes away from the game really excited about Oregon. He even said something about how he might move his commitment date up. I mean, I think it's all positive for Oregon.
Yeah, that's what it seems. I'm excited. Like, honestly, I don't have huge expectations. I think it's funny to me that people use the word contender with the playoff in Oregon, because I think they have a ceiling. I think the defense has a good chunk of a way to go. I'm still not fully in on the secondary. I'm not fully in on the pass rush, and maybe it'll improve over the course of the season. The linebacking core is uneven, I would say, but again, this is a Pac-12. Like, who I guess scares you the most? Is it at Washington State? Is it at Utah? Who's the scariest team to you?
I kind of think it's Washington State this weekend, coming off that big win, going to game day. I mean, the video is already when the bus showed up yesterday. It's mayhem in Pullman right now, and they have the offense. I think they can really bother Oregon. Utah, to me, while their offense is getting better and they're starting to really do some things with Tyler Huntley they should have done from the beginning, they don't scare me as much because offensively they can go in my opinion, in the big lulls. And you're not going to see that as much with Washington State. I think Washington State can score with Oregon where Utah can't.
Yeah, it's a style thing too to me. Like, to get Washington State and a wide open, throw the ball 50 times compared to what the sort of patience of Washington. It seems like a dramatic change. It is, and that's why I think that Washington State to me is the toughest opponent, because they don't face this air raid anymore. It's not as often in the Pac-12. You know, Sonny Dykes is not there anymore at Cal, and you face more of the spread offenses, the stuff you see every day in practice, than you would this air raid. And Gardner Minshew's playing such a high level that it's got to worry you a little bit. All right, I'm going to stay with the Oregon offense just because that's received so much of the attention. But something that is sort of concerning to me, and you touched on this a little bit, is this the best situation for Justin Herbert as it stands now? Because he plays really well. He throws the ball really well, considering, the general receiving core is not, where Oregon was a few years ago. What are the sort of drawbacks of running the style of offense that Oregon runs, which relies so heavily on power? Well, the drawbacks obviously are if you can't do it that week, you might struggle, but then you have Herbert to fall back on. I think it's more just getting Herbert in a rhythm, and it's tough to do when you run the ball so much. And Herbert is such a good quarterback that he can make plays when he has to. And so I think that when you're playing a tough game, sometimes you need to score points. Sometimes running the ball is not the best way to do it. I just worry at times that Herbert's not going to have the kind of rhythm he needs with his wide receivers. You mentioned probably the least depth on the team is at wide receiver. And we saw against Stanford too. They got really conserved the second half, and then they started allowing Herbert to throw the ball in the fourth quarter, and they started moving it again. So just being mindful of making sure Herbert still gets enough touches and can still stay active at quarterback. What is it like? It's hard to ask this question. You're not there, but watching Oregon in the second half, and there have been a number of schools with second half issues. What does it come down to when you look so good in the first half, as Oregon does against Stanford, as Oregon does certainly better than they looked in the second half against Washington, even last year against a pretty bad Nebraska team? They get out to that huge, I think they score 40 points in the first half and just barely hold on. What generally is the diagnosis for why a team suddenly just grounds to a halt? Well, I think what happens is when you have a big lead like that, your natural inclination is to slow the game down and just make sure that that you take time off the clock, because the clock is basically your biggest ally at that moment, right? And so what happens is when you try to do that, you limit your creativity and your aggressiveness on offense, and then when you do that, it's hard to get that back. It's hard to restart the engine once you've cooled it off. And that's why I think that all these offenses, and we've seen it with, like West Virginia at times, that really in the second half just kind of sputters because you can see them. They slow it down with big leads. It's hard to get that thing back going. And I understand that the coaches want to give their defense rest. They want to eat time up. Right. Because if you score too quickly, of course, it puts your defense back on the field and allows the other team to end up scoring. So understand the inclination to want to do that. I think it is a fine line between trying to eat some of that clock and also making sure that you stay aggressive and score enough points. How is it? We've talked about as I start and stop a sentence, but LSU, for example, against Georgia, and I mentioned this a couple times, it's almost like an alley-oop when the offense and defense are working together, where the defense forces a turnover, offense quickly takes advantage, everybody's energized, everybody's on the same page. What is it like being on the opposite side of the field when your defense is just making huge plays? Or what is it like when, you're at Oregon and, you were there for Chip Kelly's first year as an offensive coordinator and you just go down the field and efficiently score? What is that push-pull like with guys on the other side of the ball?
Well, are you talking about what it's like
your same team? Like,
for your own defense?
Yeah, like what was the Oregon defense like when you and the Oregon offense was rolling? What is it like on the sideline watching your own defense dominate?
You just get fired up because you understand that you don't have to be perfect. And so I think what happens is, and I played in some really poor defenses, especially in 2015 with the Giants, there's just a lot of pressure to score every drive. I think the Chiefs professionally are dealing with this right now. You have to score every drive because your defense can't stop anyone. So it just puts the pressure on you to score. If you know that your defense is playing well in a game, it's fun, obviously, to have your defense get stops and get great field position, which leads to easier opportunities to score. But just knowing that if you have a 3-and-out or you have a bad play, the defense will pick you up.
Do you think this is... Like, how does this sustain? Like, I think the obvious answer is there's pressure to recruit high-level offensive linemen at a huge clip. Is that the only real way? Is that the only real concern if they can't do that?
I think they're doing a good job of developing these guys, too. A lot of it's just coaching, right? And we see that often. So I think as Oregon continues to get better, they're going to start plucking their coaches away, and you have to be able to bring in qualified coaches that they can do the job. Obviously, your head coach is a former offensive line coach, so that position is probably handled well. But we know someone's gonna start calling for the assistants, whether it's Arroyo or I think Maribel's the name of the offensive line coach. Right, teams are gonna start calling for these guys and trying to get them to be the OC and head coach. So it's a matter of just making sure that they can bring in other assistants that can be as good at the program as these guys are now.
Is it a transition? Is it a severe transition, I guess, to go from what Oregon had been doing with a lot of sort of outside zone, getting guys who are 290 instead of 335? What is the transition like between going from a more wide open offense to, 2.5 downs out of every 4 downs, you are going straight at an opponent? What is that transition?
I'm sure the guys up front enjoy it because there's not as much running, there's not as much getting back to line of scrimmage and trying to snap the ball as quick as possible. It's a lot of finishing guys downfield, and eventually that wears on teams. Eventually, you see in the second half of games, teams at times wilt against Oregon because you've been running at them all game. So I don't think it's much of a adjustment. I think the guys up front especially really enjoy it to be able to really get after guys. So I think it's probably a positive development and guys have really enjoyed it.
So I am probably correct in assuming you are extremely high on Mario Cristobal and the potential of this program. Do you see them as playoff caliber?
And I really haven't been, I guess. Up until the season started, and then I obviously saw the way he did it. And look, he obviously did not handle the Stanford game probably the way that that people had wanted.
Right.
But he did a good job against Washington. I wish he'd be more aggressive. I think it's going to cost Oregon at some point in his coaching career, obviously. Maybe this year, maybe not. So, but his recruiting, I think, to me, and his energy have been something that I think is most important right now. They'll get the scheme down, they'll get the players in, but just his energy, his recruiting, and the kids really love him. A lot of positives for Oregon program.
Did you imagine Oregon would be bringing in, at least as they are right now, a top 5 class to Eugene, Oregon?
Yeah, I don't think people realize where and how people get to Oregon, and like that's not a recruiting hotbed. I think people see our facilities and realize that they think that like we get 5-star recruits and we do not. So,
right.
Mariota winning the Heisman was such a big deal, obviously, and then bringing in, a bunch of 5-star recruits would be a new thing for us.
Yeah, if you are flying to Oregon from anywhere basically outside of the West Coast and even parts of the West Coast, you're probably flying to Portland, and that's a good, hour 45 to Eugene?
The problem is from the airport's far east of Portland.
Yeah.
So by the time you get out of the airport and down to Eugene, it's probably almost 2:30.
It's incredible. It really is. So what is your final record for Oregon at this point? And I say that saying Oregon's final record is probably going to be better than they actually are because of that non-conference schedule.
I could see them losing one more conference game. I don't think they lose much more than that. I think they could obviously win the rest of them. But if you look at Utah and Washington State, it'd be pretty. I mean, if they get through both those games, they're a really good team. And so I think if you look at their schedule, those are probably the last two games that can really be hiccups for them. And they can get through those two road games. I mean, they could be 12-1. I think they would beat USC in the South if they play in the Pac-12 championship, especially if they're undefeated. The last 9 games a year or whatever. So I really like their chances to be really good. And the question is does Herbert come back next year?
What do you think?
They're going to be really good if he comes back. I mean, they're going to be a favorite to make the playoff, I think, if he comes back. So his brother's coming to Eugene next year. I would advise him to leave, but I kind of think he's going to stay. What do you think?
I think he'll probably stay, although it's getting kind of dicey when more and more people. I don't think it's a good quarterback class coming into the league this year. I just saw something where it was like Daniel Jones from Duke being the second best behind Herbert.
The Yahoo article. Yeah,
right. And so that to me says he's a smart dude. And he knows that if he plays really well next year, and he'll have his line in front of him. Sewell will be a sophomore, his left tackle. The receiving core will only be better with some incoming freshmen.
Yep.
The defense will only be deeper. I know the schedule's a little bit trickier, but the he's from 10 minutes. He grew up off of MLK in Eugene. Yeah. And so I think he comes back, but if I were advising, I'd probably stay. I'd probably say to leave, but it's hard to. Does he look ready to you?
Yeah, I think he does.
Okay, from both a physical and emotional standpoint, I think those are two kind of separate issues.
I think he totally does.
What have you seen from him specifically that you've said, okay, he has the ceiling to be an immediately competent NFL quarterback?
Well, I think some of the throws he's made into coverages from a pro style system, right? He's dropping back in the pocket. That even go back to game 1, that 4th and 15 throw he made for the touchdown. Mm-hmm. Go back to last game, the touchdown on the run. He can do that as well. He's got a cannon of an arm. He puts the ball right where the wide receivers need to catch it. It just feels very much like he can do everything that a pro scout would ask him to do.
All right. Geoff Schwartz,
fortunately.
Thank you very much for your time. Go Ducks. And this was for homers only. Sorry if you listened and you're not one.
Love it.
Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks to Geoff. Thanks to Oregon for beating Washington and really bringing this out of us, because it's all very new if you watched Oregon football these past couple of years. But we're going to be doing this more often, deep diving teams, just checking in and seeing how we feel about teams, maybe learning a little bit more than what we usually just have time for on our normal schedule. So thanks for listening, even if you're not an Oregon homer or just interested in two dumb homers talking about their favorite team. And hey, follow The Solid Verbal on Twitter, Facebook, the subreddit, whatever. We have a good time everywhere. And we'll see you soon. Peace.